come to teach in maximum security prison in Walpole. There's a big glass wall the size of one of the walls in this room. And I don't really know what to do. There's no sign saying anything. And I finally see a little slit, like almost you drop mail in, and I think that that's where I should stand. And I just stand here and I watch the guards behind the glass wall, somewhat like this TV station, and they're just moving around and very successfully ignoring me, so I'm not even sure they're aware I'm here. When I called the principal up, he said that they do this, and if I show any impatience whatsoever, they'll wait even longer. So I have to really stand here and reveal how happy I am to just be standing here and being ignored. About 5 minutes later, this guard comes up and says, "Who are you?" That's a question I've been trying to figure out, as my students know, for years, but I didn't think that was the time to discuss this. And my name is Michael Koran, K-O-R-A-N. And he says, "I know how to spell. You think I'm stupid?" I said, "No." And he said, "Where's your ID?" And I look inside, and I am fumbling as I am now, and I say, "Well, here we go." And I give him my driver's license. And he takes it. And I still have to stand here. And it's another 5 minutes. And he comes back. And he says, "We see that you're a teacher. What's it worth to you to get your driver's license back?" And I'm still proud of my answer. I say, "Your friendship." And I think he smiles a little bit, just a tiny little itsy, and he flips it back to me. And I have my driver's license. Now, you've got to pay to go into maximum security prison. This is America. Nothing, if you don't pay for it, it's not. And you have to pay a quarter. You have to put a quarter in a locker, because you can't take this in, because you could do all kinds of interesting things with this. So I put it in the locker. Take my bag. And the first step is a woman is sitting, and she stamps your hand. And if you're not stamped, you might not get out, because that's the way they know that you've just been let in for the day. And after she stamps my hand, I go through one of these. It's like an elevator. This door opens. It's a steel door, and I walk in. It closes behind me, and there's a steel door in front of me. And I'm in this tall elevator shaft. And I look up and see a skylight. It might be 100 feet above me. And I imagine someone I don't know is watching me to see if I'm worthy to go to maximum security prison. And I do my best revelation that I'm a nice person, not going to harm anybody. And they let me in. They open up the door. And I finally, after 7 gates, get to the prison school. And the school itself, you're locked in the school. It's a gate you can see through. And I go to the principal's office, and the principal tells me, he says, "Anything the students ask for, never say no to them, because people don't like it when you say no. So if they ask you for a sawed-off shotgun, say, 'Yes, I'd be happy to bring you a sawed-off shotgun. I just need to check it with the principal.'" And then the secretary who's sitting there says, "If you have any trouble, yell. I usually hear, and I can press a button and the guards will come." That usually hear, I tell her, didn't make me feel extremely comfortable. So I go to the classroom, and it's a room somewhat like, it's actually much more beautiful, no offense to CCTV, it's a much more beautiful room. It's an old classroom with stained wood, sun coming in, which I don't have in all of my classrooms when I teach. There are bars on the window, but it doesn't stop the sun. And I sit down, there's about 18 men all dressed in dungarees. We're not allowed to wear dungarees when we go into prison. And one of them, and eventually when his name is John, says, "Why are you here, Teach?" I said, "Well, I read the Russian writer Dostoevsky, who said if you want to really find out what society is like, go to the prison." It's like going to the restroom at a restaurant, right? How the restaurant treats things. "Teacher, we didn't ask you what Dostoevsky said. We want to know why you're here." I say, "Well, Jesus said that to his students, 'Did you visit me when I was in prison?' And his student said, 'You were never in prison.' And Jesus said, 'Anytime anyone's in prison, I'm there.' And so that's what I've come." And John said, "You didn't get it, teacher. We don't want to care. We don't care about Dostoevsky or Jesus. Why are you here?" Okay. When I went to high school, I had dark black glasses and was somewhat nerdy. And there were tough guys like the Bayside Zombies, and the girls liked them. They had big biceps. They were very strong. And I wanted to be like one of the guys. And I thought, if I came to prison, I would be with guys that are, it's a certain kind of bravery I don't have to rob a bank. I wanted to be with guys that were brave enough to do that. That's not something I can do. One of my students says, "Yeah, I was a bank robber, and I consider prison an occupational hazard." "What's your occupational hazard, Teach?" "Well, I've recently broke up with my sweetheart. We were together for 8 years, and she said she left me because I was too much in my head. My occupational hazard as a teacher is to be too much in my head." And John says, "Are you one of those pseudo intellectuals, Teach?" And I said, yes, I've come to the prison. One of my colleagues in prison, honest, I am not making this up, his name was Dante. And Dante said that most of the people he's met in life have written on them. They're all in prison. They're all behind bars, he said. And they've written on the bars, "Please don't take me out of here. It's the only home I have." So I think I, as well as most of us, in some ways are in prison. And so I've come to find out about what it's really like to be in prison. Well, we had our term, and for the final exam, it was an oral final, which I have in all my classes, and I asked the students to, either from their own lives or from writing, to make a presentation about what it's like to be in prison or how to free ourselves from the prisons we're in. So I walk into the final, and somebody's got a Bible. And he says, "The Bible is the Word of God, and it teaches you how to live so you can go to heaven and not to hell. You don't do what it's told. You don't love your neighbor as yourself. You're going to go to hell." And as soon as he says this, another student from the other side of the room says, "The Bible is a bunch of shit. What a wimp. You've got to have a big daddy in the sky to tell you how to live. And the third student says, teacher, you can't control this classroom. What kind of teacher are you? And I said, you sit down. And he says, don't you point your finger at me, teach. And I pull it away. And then John says, the class is getting a little out of hand, teach. You better tell us something. So I tell them one of my favorite stories. Some of you have heard this, just to calm us down. I tell them that I'm both bar mitzvah Jewish and baptized Catholic. Some of us need all the help we can get. And this is a cautionary tale, students, about how hard it is to know what's really going on in the world. The Jews were told, Jews were like prisoners all over the world, the Jews were told by the Pope they had 3 days to leave Rome, and they did not want to leave. And their only hope was to get someone to convince the Pope to let them stay, and they went to their most articulate rabbi. And the Pope had heard about him and said, no way am I going to debate him unless it's a silent debate. So the rabbi walks into St. Peter, and the Pope raises 3 fingers. Rabbi raises 1. Pope makes a circle around his head. Rabbi points to the ground. The Pope takes out bread and wine. And the rabbi takes out an apple. And the Pope goes to the cardinals and says, darn it, he's too smart. The Jews can stay. And the cardinals don't understand this. And they go around and they ask the Pope, what happened? And the Pope said, well, I raised 3 fingers, letting him know that God is the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And he raised 1, reminding me that more important than that is that we're all together, we're all part of one unity. That's what's important. And I made a circle around my head, letting him know that God is everywhere, and he pointed to the ground, reminding me that if it wasn't for the earth, we wouldn't be here. And the cardinal said, what happened next? Well, I took out bread and wine, reminding him that our God forgives all sin. We're all okay. And he took out an apple, reminding me that from the Garden of Eden on, we've been fundamentally flawed. He was too smart. The Jews can stay. The Jews gather around the rabbi and say, what happened? What happened? Rabbi said, well, he raised 3 fingers, letting us know that we had 3 days to leave. And I raised 1, letting him know that not one of us is leaving. He made a circle around his head, saying we had to even leave the suburbs. I pointed to the ground and said, we're staying right here. And then what happened next? And the rabbi said, I don't know. He took out his lunch, so I took out mine. Well, that did calm things down for a moment so we could have our final exam. And John begins. And John says, I was always a skinny, short kid. My father used to beat me whenever I stayed out late, and that didn't stop me from staying out late. I never came in early. Then I had this dream, and I go to the minister and I tell him the dream. It's the last time I've ever been in church. The dream was I died, and I did go to heaven. And they're playing this music. I could take it for about 60 seconds. And I tell the angels, I'm out of here. And the angels say, you can't leave heaven. Heaven is infinite distance from hell or anywhere else. You can't go. He says, I'm out of here. And I had such a determination to get out of that place. I had, if you want to use those angels' words, an infinite determination that I eventually was able to get close to hell. And I can feel in my back, they're watching me. This has never happened before. And I get into hell, and hell is cold. It's not what people said. The reason people imagine it's hot is because they have to imagine it's hot. It is cold and lonely. And people were freezing. They were in ice. And I had all this energy from my trip from heaven, and I had a lot of warmth with me, and it started melting the ice. And it went, this is the sounds I like. I started knocking on the ice, and there was more melting, and people started coming out and making more. Ow! Oh, these were the sounds. And so, minister, that's why I'm leaving the church and this church music. And I'm going to be a jazz musician. And I tell John, thank you for your final contribution, and we're going to do what we do with American Indians do. And we did this in prison. After the presentation, the prisoner says, hey, and the audience says, ho. So if you like, you can join it. So I said, John, say hey. He says, okay, hey. And people can say, ho, if you want to encourage them, yes. Thank you. Well, they did even better than that, but we're warming up. We have another chance to do that. And John says, have you ever been in prison, Michael? What's the closest you've ever been to prison? Well, I worked with emotionally disturbed children. I'll try to tell this story from one of their perspectives, because it was a prison for him. My name is Tommy, and I was the best center fielder in a school for emotionally disturbed children. And I wanted to escape. And so I run from center field to a stone wall, and I start climbing over, and this counselor grabs me from behind, and I yell at him, let me go, you slave master, let me go. He holds me tighter. And then I see a gentleman with a suit and tie, and he sees this big counselor holding me, and he says to my counselor, you leave that child alone. And I tell the guy, you mind your own business, sir. And the guy walks away, and I turn to my counselor and say, you let me go! Let me go! And Thompson gets up. Dante said that in prison, people are either broken or they're made strong as steel. And Thompson was made strong as steel. He stood like this. He says, that reminds me. I'm 10 years old, and I'm playing basketball in the living room. And I knock over a lamp. I'm always knocking things over, and I'm going to get in trouble. And I tell my younger brother, Charlie, when Mom gets home, tell her that you broke the lamp. And Charlie says, that's going to get you in trouble, Thompson, because you're supposed to be responsible for me. And I said, Charlie, tell Mom that the cat came in from next door and broke the lamp, please. My mother comes home. Charlie runs and says, Thompson told me to tell you that the cat came in from next door and broke the... As I hear this, I go into my room, and I hide under my bed. Afraid my mother's going to hit me. And I just stay there. Nothing happens. And then I peek out into the living room, and I see my mother is crying on the couch. And I carefully go out of the living room, and I sit next to her, and I say, Mom, why are you crying? And she says, I'm a lousy mother. I've made my boy into someone who lies to his mother. And I said, Ma, I don't want you to cry. I'd rather you hit me than cry. And she looks at me and she says, Thompson, You warm your mama's heart. Hey. And John says, isn't this sweet, teacher? All these stories about pain and love. Isn't there any? Is that the only way we can find love, teacher, by hitting each other? And one of my best students, Arthur de Tullio, says, I've got a poem. It's called A Wizard of Sorts. Deep within my solitude, beneath the bloated moon, I gather in my basement with a needle and a spoon, wrap a belt around my arm, then penetrate my vein to feed the hungry demon that exist within my brain. I mix the precious powders with my potions and my pills that work the twisted magic and unleash pagan spells that ward away the darkness and satisfy the pain and calm the hungry demons that exist within my brain. A wizard of a sort am I, but not without its toll. I conjure grand illusions, but I sacrifice my soul, and reality is silent as it slithers down the drain to drown the hungry demons that exist within my brain. I've practiced every spell I know in hope of some relief, but nothing that I satisfy can satisfy the beast, and nothing that I try can satisfy the beast, be it heroin, the lauded, opium, or cocaine. It cannot kill the demons that exist within my brain. Hey. Well, I wrote a lot to Arthur, and he finally wrote me. And he said, Mike, I've kicked it. And I said, how? And he said, runner's high, Mike. Was running 5 miles a day, enabled him to stop taking drugs. It was quiet. No one stood up. And I said, we can do that here too. I'm a teacher, and I told my students in my classes, especially when I have nothing to say, I say any questions, feelings, thoughts, answers. So I'll say it now. Any questions, feelings, thoughts, answers? And as I say as a teacher, don't all answer at once. And then Rocky did get up. Rocky was once a state trooper. And then he quit his job, what he thought was a career move, and became an armed robber of vehicles, armed vehicles. You know, everyone's got it. Sometimes you get tired of your job and you want to move up in the world. And he was actually quite successful at this. Once on a very big heist, they changed cars at a Burger King. They had it all planned, and they were singing and going over the mountain, and all of a sudden they discovered there was a roadblock. He tells me the story. There's a roadblock in front of him, and apparently someone had seen them change cars at Burger King. And Rocky said he had a choice then, because they had guns. They could either try to shoot their way out, which would kill people, maybe even themselves, or to give up. And he decided to give up. He knew what it was like to be a trooper. And they don't like it when you rob armored vehicles. You know, if it's rape, it's about 3 years, 12 years he was in prison. This is the story he tells me. He said, he came to a door, like the doors I went in through in prison. And he knew if he went through this door, he could have a new life. Healthy, happy, loving. And there was this big guard at the door. Said, you can't go through. He said, I gotta get through. A new life is here. So I'm sorry, you cannot go through, don't you hear me? And Rocky decided to wait the guy out. Day after day, he waited him out. Heard it for 12 years. At the end of the 12 years, another guy comes up, much smaller than Rocky, little guy. Says, I want to get through the door. And the guard says, you can't get through. And the little guy takes the guard by the shirt, pulls him aside, and goes through the door. And Rocky realizes he could have gone through 12 years ago. Hey! And then Jeff said, I got a door story. Very different. Jeff was in prison for killing his wife and lover. He found them making love and went to his bedroom to get a gun and shot them, killed them. And he got first-degree murder, he told me, because if he had just shot them, if he had a gun at the time when he discovered just killed them, that would have been second degree because it wasn't, but because he went to his bedroom, it was, at least his lawyer couldn't help him with this, it was premeditated murder, and he got life in prison for this. And he says, my door story is about love. He said, I was once in one of these classes that you teach, teacher, because I like adult education. And I see this woman that I love, and I go over to her and I say, after the class is over, just one class, I say, hey, I think we've really got something special between us. Let's get to know one another. And she says, that's a nice line. But thanks, but no thanks. And I'm really a sensitive guy. Teach. And so I go to New Hampshire in a cabin that I've got, and I start imagining our life together. And we wake up at dawn. We chop the ice and get fish, and we roast it over the fire. And we walk around and look at the seasons change each day. We hug to keep each other warm. We make love by fire in the evening. And it's a great life. Imagination for about 3 months. And then I hear a knock on the door. And I go over to the door, and I open it, and it's her. And I look at her and I say, you know, you're not at all as beautiful as my dreams about you. Don't disturb my dreams. And I close the door on her. And then when I try to dream about her, my dreams get tinier and tinier and tinier. No technicolor, just a point. So I feel like I've descended into hell because of my imagination. Hey.
Hello.
One of my strongest prisoners, Whitey. Whitey said,
was reading this book by Robert Frost. He says, make your avocation, that's your hobby, guys. Make your avocation your vocation, that's your work. Make your hobby your work. And I found exactly what it is I love to do. I love to go into people's homes, handcuff them to the bed, and get the money. It's a great job. You see new homes, you meet new people. It's night work. You got money. It's everything anyone ever could want. And there were even perks. Like the woman said, hey, don't tell them where the money is. I had a way to do stuff to say, and she'd say, honey, tell them where the money is. Well, I read that if you hit a robbery with a mask on, even a mustache or a beard that you don't ordinarily wear, you get twice the time. So I like a little job recognition anyway. So I take off my mask, which was a real mistake, and they catch me. So I'm in prison, but this is America. I got a business going in prison. Selling dope to everybody. Don't look at that way at me, Teach. Even you would bring it in if the price is right. Don't be so naive. This is America. So I'm making a fortune selling, and the guards are jealous, making more than them. See my notebook on my bed. This guard says, not supposed to have stuff on your bed. Take it off. I'm not gonna put my journal on the floor. No way. And the punk, he didn't want to take me on one-on-one. He calls 3 people, 3 guards, and they grab me, and they make me, I don't want to do it, they make me. Then they lock me in the solitary confinement. And there's a sink with a faucet and a flat bed, that's it. And I'm angry, and I rip the faucet out of the wall. And there's this little glass, thick glass that they check you in, they look in you, and I take the faucet and I go, BAM! BAM! I break right through that glass, and when the guards pass, I take my shit and I throw it at them, anything I got. Take my urine and throw it at them, and some of the baby powder in there, I throw that too, and they don't like this. And they put me into the prison of prisons, Leavenworth. And I could really get a business going. I have people working for me now. Little Mike. Little Mike comes to me, he says, after this very successful business, he says, Big Sam ain't paying for the dope. If you ever run a business, if people don't pay you, especially in prison, that business is not going to go very far. And I tell Mike, he's just a little guy, I say, listen, you're a little guy, and you're a father, and you're getting out in 4 months, I'll take care of Big Sam. So I eat my lunch, chop suey, and I go to meet Sam in the gymnasium. And even I was surprised. He had a knife. And he stabs, and he stabs me 7 fucking times. And I'm lying on the floor. And I'm thinking I'm gonna die. And people are gonna think the asshole, he died in a concrete floor in a gymnasium. And a doctor comes, he looks at me, and he says, Whitey, you're a lucky man. He stabbed you 7 times, he missed your heart and your lungs. You're gonna live. And I look at him, and I say, Doc, I ain't no religious man. I like those churches. But I must have been saved for a reason. Guys, I don't know what that reason is, and that's why I come to this class. Hey.
Questions, feelings, stories, answers. Ray gets up. Ray told me I'm in prison because I was in this bar and this guy came, and after the bar closed, he invited me up to his house for a drink, and I go for a drink, and he makes a pass at me. And I slug him, and the fucker dies. And since he's dead, I take, I take his wallet. That was my mistake, and I get out of there. And 2 days later, they catch me, and because I took his wallet, they thought it was murder, and I'm here for life. And this is my story about what I learned in prison. I've often been exposed to the idea that there's a universal consciousness pervading everything, that each of us are an equal expression of this universal consciousness. In some religions, this is called the Tao. In others, the Holy Spirit. Now, it's one thing to understand this on an intellectual level, and very different to understand this on a day-to-day, getting from one step to another level. So when I'm in prison, I get a call from my sister, and she tells me that my brother died of a heart attack, and I wouldn't be invited to the funeral. This was hard to take, Both my sisters, they still had a brother. I alone was brotherless, and they were rejecting me. I couldn't even go to the funeral. But I had just started meditation, and this was going to be my test to see if I could keep my center. And I was just barely able to do so. And about 3 years into meditation, I get this insight that every event in the world is neutral. It has a value only because of what we put on it. I took my being sentenced to prison for life for an example. To some people, the courts and the family of the victims, this was a good thing that I was in prison. To other people, my family, this was a bad thing. So the event, for me, it's actually both good and bad. I'm in this program to get a bachelor's degree. It's been somewhat good for me. For my family, it was bad. For his family, it was good. So the event itself doesn't have any value in itself. And I thought if this was true for me being in prison, it's true for every event across the board. So I'm bopping along, doing my own thing, and weightlifting, studying, and then I get a call from my sister again, and I try to get back to her. It takes me about 2 days to get back, and I don't get her. I get her brother. My brother-in-law, rather, I'm sorry, I get her husband. And her husband says that they've been having a fight. And my sister's gone to live with my mother. And I want to know, well, can I talk to my sister? And my brother-in-law knew not to give me my mother's phone number. My mother had disowned me when I was sent to prison. But he was pissed at my sister, so he gave me the number. And that actually led to a reconciliation between my mother and I. But I'm going to save that teach for another story. And then my brother-in-law tells me something else he knows he shouldn't tell me. He tells me that my brother didn't die of a heart attack. He slit his own throat. Now, this is really going to be a test to see if I could keep my center now. I consider myself very fortunate to be on the spiritual path that I am on. And I discovered I had to go through the grieving again, and I had to face the fact that I was lied to on such an important matter. And for the first time, I discovered that I could feel the sadness without becoming the sadness. I discovered that joy and grief emanate from within. So I now decided what could I learn from my brother's death. It was the last lesson he could teach me. And the thing I most learned when I thought of the pain that he had caused our family, I was filled with compassion. My poor family, one brother suicide, the other in life in prison. My sister's been in and out of mental hospitals. I now know why. I had myself tried to kill myself 3 years ago, and I now know I could never do that. I don't want to cause pain to my family. I am now the sole surviving male of my clan. And I now know that I can take responsibility for myself. And I can follow the path I'm on. I've got the courage and the strength to do so. And I can follow this path to its ultimate destination. Hey.
Oh.
We're almost finished with the final. My best student, Arthur DiTullio, had missed many journals, and so he asked me, Mike, can I give another oral final to help my final grade? And I said, Arthur, that'd be good. Arthur says, my most intense experience making love occurred with a woman I was very much in love with at the time. Her name was Cindy. And it happened in, of all places, a cemetery. We were hitchhiking back from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to Pennsylvania and got stranded at 2 o'clock in the morning in Binghamton, New York on Route 17. The only sound was the echo of our voices and the buzz of the arc lamps above. From where we stood, we could just see rows and rows of houses with backyards. There was no shelter for us, except about a quarter of a mile down the road, we saw a big black expanse. We thought it was some kind of park. And since the road before us was a black, flat ribbon of emptiness, we decided to go for the park. And when we get there, it's not a park at all. It's a cemetery, and it has these iron spikes all around it. But we circle the cemetery, and we finally come to a place that's as if some giant hands or an out-of-control car had opened it up for us. And so we went in, and I still remember the name of the grave stone by which we slept. William Quirk. And this huge headstone and fir trees on two sides. It made a lovely stall. And I can't imagine, I don't remember if we had thought of making love before we got into our sleeping bags, but once we were inside, that was irrelevant. Now, there are some who might say that making love on someone's gravestone is a sin or sacrilegious, you know, an offense to the dead. But I had a sense, as did Cindy, that William Quirk approved. I know I would. Well, the cemetery was cool, dark, and silent, except for the symphony of our bodies. That was the only sound. It was surreal, as if we were defying death by performing the ultimate ritual to life in death's own bedroom. I still remember that my arms were outstretched, and I looked into Cindy's eyes, and it happened. I saw myself through her eyes, and she saw me through my eyes. And it felt like we were both joined by some life force, some energy, call it what you will, that connected us to every living thing around us. I now know this is 10 years after this happened. This sounds like a trashy romance novel. But we were both there, and we both experienced it. It was as if I was her, and she was I. And we were both united by something that's inside of us, yet also external to us, invisible cords that connected us all to one another. This was the night I discovered the difference between sex and making love. From the way Cindy described what she felt, she took it on a much more personal level than I. For her, it validated the bonds between us. She was content to have just experienced it once. Whereas for me, I thought we were just 2 out of billions. And I felt connected to every animal, plant, and human being in that moment. And I wanted to experience that again and again and again. Hey. Well, it was a great final exam. Students, they haven't kicked me out yet. I give everyone A's. Somehow the registrar seems that's fine, and certainly with a final exam like this, you people are going to get A. And now which is always hard at the end of the class, it's time to go. And when I'm walking out, Ray says, Peach, remember to tell everybody that those of us who are in these bachelor's and master's programs, our recidivism rate is almost 0. So if they want to keep crime off the streets, they better keep teaching us. And I say goodbye and start walking out of the prison. And when I get to the last gate, I discover that in haste to teach the final exam, I forgot to get stamped. Sometimes they forget too, because I started to be friendly with the people at the gate. And this is a new person sitting there, not the person that when I came in, and she doesn't know whether to let me out or not. So I have to just stand there for a while, and eventually I hear on the phone, "It's okay, he's a teacher. You can get him out." And so that's how I got out of maximum security prison. Well, thank you. This was our final exam in maximum security prison. I think for our show, we're going to open it up for, I think, another 5 or 10 minutes for questions, feelings, thoughts, and answers from you. Oh, wow, thank you. So, questions, feelings, thoughts, answers.
What differences, if any, do you feel remembering back to when you were first hearing these stories versus what you're feeling at
Thank you. I just discovered that in rehearsal this week. It's so easy to, for me at least, to tell the stories and not totally take them in. So the advantage of doing this again and again is maybe I'll finally get. My mother used to say, those who can do, those who can't teach. I think this week I finally got what Ray was saying, that joy and grief emanate within. So that's, and also in trying to be these different people, discovering that I'm like them. You know, I was really happy to discover there's some part of me like Whitey. I play tennis and be Whitey now. You know, and, you know that. So the advantage of doing the theater is to just discover more and more the truths of what they're saying, and not just that. So they become deeper and deeper stories for me. It's amazing because I know most of the people here and you're always. Well, we can do this. This is fine.
Michael, do you personally agree with Dante that we're all in prison? And is it like an all or none principle?
I am always surprised to discover a new prison. Certainly for me being too much in my head. I have a great movement teacher who happens to be here and in the audience, Patrick Crowley, and he's been helping free me in my body, you know, to really feel and move. So that was certainly a prison for me. So I would think for many of us there's always new prisons to escape from. Yes, Arthur is out now, Arthur DiTullio. It's very hard to be out. It's very hard to be out. Ray, this is a sad story. Ray's attorney told me, Ray was the one who said joy and grief emanate from within, and wanted me to be on to meet the parole board, to argue for him, to be freed. He was the one who told me that he just slugged this man and the man died and he took the man's wallet. And I said I'd be happy to because I really admire him. I actually paid my students rights for each to tell these stories and for them to get the money in prison. You know, not an immense amount, but $50 was a good money for them. So I told Ray I would be happy to, and then his lawyer tells me, do you know why Ray's in prison? And I said, yes, he told me. And his lawyer said, well, let me tell you again. And she says that he was a male prostitute. And he went up to the room with this guy and killed him, and then sat and broke eggs and made an omelet. Just sat there with when the guy was dead, and then took his wallet and left. And I told the lawyer, I need to think about this or talk to more people because I'm not sure Ray has come to terms with his crime if he hasn't told me the truth about this. And the lawyer just immediately said, you can't come to the parole board if you have questions like that. And Ray wrote, we are still in touch. I just actually wrote him a letter this week. And he was very angry and hurt He said, why did you let me down? And I didn't want to say that his lawyer did it to get him angry at his lawyer, so I didn't know what to say to him. And I just wrote him, and I think I would like to see him in person and tell him what I'm telling you now. But he's still in prison, Ray.
How long ago was this teaching?
I stopped teaching in the, I think, mid-90s. I taught for 4 years. The nicest prison, there's one prison that Malcolm X went to. We're famous for both. Martin Luther King went to Boston University, and Malcolm X went to Norfolk Prison. And they both were awesome educations. Norfolk Prison, which is a medium security, was created by an architect. It used to be, I think, a girls' school. And he made sure by the way he architecturally created the prison that it couldn't turn into an excessively horrible prison. Because the way he set it up was there was just small bungalows. And so there's only could be a certain number of prisons in each little house, and lots of space between the bungalows. And so the architecture helped make it a better prison and help people, I would imagine, help people like Malcolm X have a much better prison experience than people had in Wall.
So in the beginning, when you came, it seemed kind of contentious. They were saying, why are you here, why are you here? Did that kind of continue throughout? Did they accept you as a teacher right away, or did you have to?
They accused me, the only time I ever had it in ever teaching, they said, are you trying to make this class boring? Honest. Because I didn't understand it. When we argue about some important things like should people have abortions or not, we can get angry at each other. But when they get angry, which is one of the things I like about them in a way, they're very physical, but their anger can turn into blows very quickly. So I started teaching Plato's Republic. Questions like, if you had an invisible ring, what would you do? And they said, are you making, and we were reading from the textbook. So I had to keep it boring for a while. And even at the end, there was one who didn't have an oral final and said, Mike, can I send it to you in your home? Can you give me a grade now, or can I send it to you in your home? And I did not want to give him my address. And I thought I was standing up for the teaching profession by saying, I won't give you your grade till I get the paper sent to Boston University. And that was a little scary. I was standing up for, good teaching at some risk. They taught me something that might help. One of my students, Whitey is also out. Whitey is out and was the man friend of a woman friend of mine who was working in prison. And Whitey got a great job for Whitey. He was responsible for a high school in Charlestown, making sure that everybody behaved. And he was! It was a great job for him. And it was a safe school to be in. Whatever Whitey wanted, I am sure. That's what, oh yeah, I think by then, yes. Now once my students have told me, they said, I would still rob banks when I got out, but now that I've got a BA, I can do other things. One of the things I tried to convince my students was that blue-collar crime doesn't pay.
How did you get this group of people to a degree of vulnerability like you described at the end? Because that couldn't have just been easy, right? This is a tough bunch of people who are not accustomed to expressing that sort of their own suffering in that way, couldn't they?
I found them in some ways more because they didn't have this, which I had. That's why I loved teaching with them. I told them I really felt I was part of a men's group. They knew that I really admired them and was happy to be with them. I mean, it was just nice to be these strong, and when they speak, they speak very differently than I. I hope I conveyed some of that. So once they start talking about themselves, it's just, there's no intellectual distance. They're going to just say what they feel. And they loved the opportunity. It was not hard at all, actually, surprisingly. Not at all hard to have them pour out their stories to me. and to read them out loud to one another.
Would you ever share this with them?
I'd love to. That's a possibility to take this back to maybe at least medium security. I would like to. I don't know if they would allow me to do that, but I'm going. Thank you for asking. I was thinking of asking, and now I will ask.
What was special about them that you would never get from your normal student population?
I would say they respected me because I was a pseudo-intellectual. They did. They respected me because I had all this reading, and they didn't have that. And so it was, one of the reasons I wanted to teach there was to find out if what I have discovered is true for people who live very, very differently. And it was quite true. I mean, when Ray starts talking about a universal consciousness pervades everything, joy and grief, they, in their own way, believed many of the things I did, and that was very confirming, but in a much more physical.
Do you think, Michael, that they were
so able to express themselves because they were in a safe environment as men to actually be vulnerable? Because it's not generally accepted outside.
I mean, if we had if we had 16 men outside.
Men generally aren't allowed, if they cried and there's something wrong with them, or they sort of have to perform this function of being on top of everything all the time, or they're not considered men. And so do you think they would have had such a degree of safety, and they were already obviously incredibly passionate people anyway, to have a life like this? And it's, am I being clear?
Yes, well, you see, they're really, as Ray said, I'm bopping along, going this. They're like on college. In some ways, they're living in dorms. I wasn't like the first teacher coming in, so they're quite.
Because I just wonder if you were maybe one person who actually gave them something they really wanted, was somebody to ask them.
No, I
"What
think
do you
they had
feel?"
learned from
They
other.
had learned
Yes,
from
that other.
people? Okay.
The most frightening thing, I left out some of the ones. I heard some of the most frightening stories from them that I didn't say. We watched a movie, and let me bring in a movie called, what was the name of the movie? It wasn't The Odd Fellows, I don't think, something like that, where it was a mafia movie, very scary movie where one of the mafias kills someone else with a turkey knife and puts them in a trunk, all the things that mafia do. What? The Goodfellows, yes, that's what it was. And so we talk about it afterwards, and the only thing my students were angry at was that at the end somebody squealed. A rest, it wasn't, this was a particular class. And probably one of the scariest stories, this same class was, we have to say something after this is not a good way to end, but just to feel what these people are like. They said, one of the students said, I'm in the 7th grade, and there was this really nerdy guy like you teach, and we just couldn't help making fun of him, and he wasn't good with his hands like you, and we would turn the radio on real loud so the teacher would blame it on him, and he got his fingers caught in this machine, and it cut off his fingers, and he had to come back to class 3 months later with artificial fingers, and we just couldn't help it. We had to keep making fun of him. So there was no, and this particular man who told me this story said that the reason he was in prison, and this also scared me, he said that he was on the street with a girlfriend, and his girlfriend made some kind of remark to a woman in the car, and the guy came out and slapped his girlfriend. And my student, the prisoner, went to his trunk, got out a gun, and the guy who was in the car made a mistake and said, "Oh, you punk, put away that gun." And my student shot him and killed him. And my student said, the reason I didn't shoot him in the knees is because I know you get more, because that would show it's premeditated, and I wanted to just make it into a fight. And I knew that I would get less time. So that, and now, I brought that story back to my students, which I teach at Lowell, and told them their reaction to it just like you did. And I was at least a little heartened that he started to change the story when he discovered that people outside didn't like the story, and changed it to something that happened more accidentally. But that was one of the scary stories for me.
Michael, how do you have compassion for someone like that? I mean, we all try to be compassionate with people, especially people who have unfortunate lives. But for some people, I mean, it's almost like when someone says, well, I killed this person, and I don't even care, and I don't even care, I'll do it again, who cares, I'll get less time, this is why I did it. How do you, what do you reach to, how do you have compassion, or do you not have compassion for someone like that? I mean, how does that work for you?
Let's see. The first, there's two answers to that. One of my favorite stories is Lenny Bruce, the comedian, plays Father Flynn, and he's called into a prison because Lenny has two guards hostage and a razor next to their throats, and he won't let the guards go, and the prison authorities think their only hope is to get his old priest, Father Flynn, played by Lenny Bruce. And Lenny Bruce comes and says, "Lefty, this is your old priest, Father Flynn. I remember you as a child, Lefty, and killing 6 children doesn't make anybody all bad." So the second answer is, I had neither compassion nor non-compassion for them. I didn't think about their crimes. I was, at least then, just happy to be with them, sometimes a little scared, more scared of the guards than them. When the guards saw that the prisoners liked me, I was afraid the guards would harm me, by getting me into a situation that was difficult. That was hard. I would bring in a meditation bowl. They wouldn't let it in, and once, well, this is on television. Yes, why not? Sean can edit this. So once I have condoms, because if you're a responsible man, you have to have, and I forgot to take them out. And they thought I was sneaking them into the prisoners. One of the horrible things about prison, this I have compassion for, maybe not the right way, but I really feel this. There's 240,000 rapes of men against men in prison every year in America. So I have these, and so the condoms and then I'm brought into an office where someone is the guard of the president of all the guards, sitting high, and he's, and I'm really, what are you doing? He has this deep voice. Why are you doing this? And that scared me a bit. But so the answer is, though, that I was so happy to be with them that I didn't think of their crimes, which they liked. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I was just happy to be with, in some ways, to me, I mean, I'm not brave enough to rob armored vehicles, but there's a certain physical bravery there that I think could be channeled to do some very good things, like protect you in case anything, like Whitey's doing in the schools.
Do you have any advice for someone who's going to teach in prison?
There's a women's prison in Framingham I would like to teach that I never have.
No, any advice.
I think the two things that are
Not
that
about how to do it, but
how to
how to do it.
they would love you if you're interested. I think the things that they would most, even more than the things that would be wonderful for them are things like yoga, meditation. If that's not the answer, no.
Probably not.
Try one more time. Yes? I mean, how to be a good teacher in prison?
How to walk into that space from your experience now. I imagine you
time you went in, you had no idea. Did anyone prepare you for that?
Not really.
So I just wondered if you could distill like one.
I think being oblivious is helpful. No, it really was. People who know me now, you can imagine how I was then. Oh, there's these nice men here, and they're paying me. Oh, isn't that nice? Let's talk about that. I find that was really what was the most helpful. Yes.
Are there ways in which the prisoners tested you that perhaps was different than students outside prison test the teaching?
Well, except for the man who wanted to get the grade, I learned that not to trust their stories. That's not quite the answer, though. They were just like my UMass students. There's a difference between high school and college. Once you're in college, you want a good grade. And they had been enough in the system that they knew to get a grade, they had to do what was required. So they really were hip college students. Like people here who pay a lot of money, they don't want to drop out of college. And they loved getting there. I mean, there really is. They don't go into blue-collar crime after they get out. Or at least if they do, they're good enough not to be caught. They don't go, they're not sent back. It's a great now my University of Massachusetts students at Lowell have a very hard argument. They say, why should these prisoners get free education, whereas we have to work, and they really work hard at UMass Lowell, 9 to 5 jobs and go to school, which is a very hard question to answer. The only indirect answer is that as far as society goes, we're safer and we save money by giving them educations. On that happy note, may we all who want to be liberated from whatever prisons we are in. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Wow.